I know what I have to do. And that is review this episode. Hello, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Eye of the Beholder, which is episode 18 of season 7 of Star Trek The Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video, I cover the 7th season episode, Eye of the Beholder. So Eye of the Beholder is the episode where a crewmate inexplicably commits suicide. Troi and Worf investigate this weird incident, and they soon start to form a romance where they sleep together. And then, as they're investigating the gentleman who killed himself, they question his girlfriend, Lieutenant Calloway, but then Lieutenant Calloway and Worf start to form a sort of relationship themselves, much to Troi being jealous, and she soon discovers them making out, and they just laugh at her, and so she kills Worf, and she gets very upset, and she goes to kill herself, saying that she knows what she has to do. But right before she killed herself, the real Worf reveals himself to her, and she realizes that everything is okay. So what really happened was there was this empathic echo left over from a person who helped build the ship, who was part Betazoid, and apparently when he died, his empathic whatever got implanted in that area. So when that first dude first opened that area, he got exposed to it because he was also empathic, and so he got exposed to it, and so he lived out this fantasy, and that led him to believe he had to kill himself, and so he did. Same thing happened to Troi when she was investigating his murder. She experienced this empathic thing that led her to this fantasy where she had an affair with Worf, but Worf cheated on her, so she killed Worf and then wanted to kill herself. But that was all fantasy. It was all fiction. None of it really happened. Well, that one awkward scene where Worf went up to Riker and awkwardly asked if he could date Troi, but didn't really ask. That actually really did happen, but the Worf and Troi, having sex, that didn't happen. That was a part of the fantasy, and that's the episode. So I think maybe sometimes when I give these synopsis recaps, you can kind of get a feeling of how I feel about this episode, and I think probably get a sense of how I feel about it from that recap. Now, when I first was watching TNG and I saw this preview, the promo for this episode, I'm like, God, Jesus Christ. They're doing the Worf and Troi thing. They're actually doing it. God damn it. And so when I went to watch the episode, I was not looking forward to it. So you could say I did prejudge it a little. Kat wants to be in the review as well. What do you want to be in the review, Lillian? You want to be in the review? I'm sorry, she's more interesting to me in this episode. Anyways, so where was I? Worf, Troi, right. So when I tuned in and I saw the suicide angle, I was surprised. I was like, maybe I misjudged this episode. Maybe it's actually going to be a lot better, because this is very interesting. It's very unique. You don't see characters on Star Trek killing themselves. Roddenberry would be tut-tutting. But he's not around anymore, so who cares? Anyways, so yeah, I thought it was really interesting. You saw this nacelle tube thing, which is a part of the ship you've never really seen before. And it was pretty good investigating until we get to the Troi and Worf romance, and I was like, okay, so this is the piece of shit episode that I was expecting to see. Here it is. Hello. It is so dumb. And I'm sorry, I don't like that scene where Worf awkwardly goes up to Riker when he's on a date and it's like, well, if I were to want to date her, I would tell you. And he was like, Worf, you're asking like you want to ask me, do you want to ask me something? It's like, no, why? Is there someone you would rather not I date or something? Like, that's out of character. Completely and utterly and totally out of character for Worf. In fact, a lot of this episode seemed like Worf was out of character. Now, granted, a lot of the episode was a fantasy that didn't really happen. So, that excuse. But, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of the Worf and Troi thing. I think it was a huge mistake. I love Michael Piller, as I've talked about in many videos I did. But I talked about before when I covered Parallels that Rene Echevarria, who's a good writer, a smart writer, someone who knows how to make good Star Trek, he wanted to put Riker and Troi together for the final season. But Michael Piller said, no! Usually it's Rick Berman I have as the villain, but this time Michael Piller was the villain. Anyway, he said, no, that's ordinary. We've done that before. Let's do something original. Let's do Troi and Worf. Yeah. I mean, this is another thing I talked about in other videos. If you must put Troi with some weird romance that's new and weird and something you wouldn't expect, do fucking Data. Data and Troi would have been way better. Trata, that's what I say. Like, that would have been great. Worf and Troi, like, they just have no chemistry. Now, granted, they're nowhere near as bad as 7 of 9 and Chakotay, but no romance can be. Like, that is the absolute epitome of terrible romances. But this is up there. It is definitely up there. And I don't like Parallels was one thing, and I mentioned that episode because it's a parallel universe where weird shit happens. Oh, they got feet for hands or whatever. They didn't do that. But, Picard was dead, and there's a Cardassian ensign, and that war with the Bajorans. Like, so you can have weird parallel universe shit. You can have Worf and Troi together. That's a weird parallel universe shit. But don't fucking do it in reality. Now, granted, most of this wasn't reality. It was just a fantasy. But they were hinting at, as I said, the scene where Worf goes to Riker and being all awkward, that was real life. That was not part of the fantasy. And then, of course, they do date. In one episode, all good things, and then rightfully, wisely, it is completely dropped and never mentioned ever again. Very wisely. Now, in the movies, they do the right thing. They put Worf and Riker, I'm sorry, not Worf and Riker, that's an interesting pairing. Troi, they put Troi and Riker together, which is what they should have fucking did here in season 7. So that way they could have built up to it, and that way when it happened in the movies, it would have felt a lot more natural and not out of nowhere. They did the wrong thing. Now, that aside, if I just forget about the Worf Troi stuff, which is hard to do because it's kind of the center of the episode, but if I try to put that to one side, the episode's kind of cheesy anyway. Like, it starts out fine with, like, investigating the murder, the suicide. Like, that was interesting. That was kind of interesting, actually. But it becomes cheesy once you get into Troi's fantasy. Even if I say it's not Worf, let's say it's Riker in her fantasy. It doesn't matter. It's still cheesy. It's still, like, ridiculous, and the whole empathic echo, like, that's stupid. Like, what does that even mean, empathic echo? Like, I don't know, it just gets cheesy, and the whole thing with Worf, like, flirting with Calloway, going, oh, no, granted, it's not the real Worf, but still, it's like, I don't know what else to say. And plus, like, the logic of this episode is really inconsistent. Like, So in her fantasy, she knew all this stuff about Lieutenant Pierce, which she didn't find out in real life. But then Lieutenant Pierce turned out to be a real person. But in her fantasy, he was, on board the Enterprise. But in real life, he died at Utopia Planitia. But she knew stuff about him in her fantasy that she didn't learn before her fantasy. So how'd she know that? I guess it was part of the Empathic Echo. I don't know. Like, I can analyze, like, step by step, like, the beats of her fantasy and how it just doesn't really add up. Like, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would she imagine all this bullshit with, like, Worf in order just to recreate? She's like, I guess at the end she said, I filled in the blanks with my own real life. So I guess they're implying in real life she has a thing for Worf. But still, even so, like, it seems kind of that this empathic echo would make her. It's like really convenient. It's always convenient when something like this happens that there is real life situation that just so happens to fit this empathic echo. The other comparison I would make is the Deep Space Nine episode Dramatis Personae, where the empathic thingy makes there be a power struggle with the command structure. But lucky for the empathic thingy, there was already a bit of a divide between the Bajorans and Starfleet. Isn't that fucking convenient? Same thing here. There just so happens to be this romance or whatever, the romantic feelings that she has for Worf, and it just so happens to feed into this, fucking girlfriend or whatever of the guy who died. But I gotta talk about my favorite line of the episode. My favorite line of the episode is when they're questioning Lieutenant Calloway, and they ask her about, the Lieutenant Dan, Lieutenant Dan, who the guy who offed himself, and she says, "It's not like him to commit suicide. He's never done it before." Like, I wanted her to say, he's never done it before. What does that mean? It's not like, think about this. It's not like him to commit suicide. Of course it's not, because he would already be dead if it was. Like, what does that mean? It's not like him to commit suicide. I mean, pesticide, homicide, genocide. Sure, he does those things all the time, but not suicide. Like, what does that mean? It's not like him to commit suicide. Is that like, did someone, like, how could someone write this? And it was my boy here, Renee Echevarria, who wrote the teleplay for this. So Bren Braga had the story idea and wrote the episode, so I put most of the blame with him. But between the two of them, nobody looked at this line and I was like, yeah, no, this is stupid. Like, what? It's not like him to commit suicide on Tuesdays. He only commits suicide on a Wednesday. Well, he doesn't drink coffee in the afternoon. He likes to commit suicide in the evening, not the morning. What's wrong? Like, what does it mean it's not like him to commit? Now, getting into the whole suicide thing. This episode is implying, and it seems that, like, all of the things that they're hinting at is that it's an empathic echo that popped up, and before then he was perfectly happy. And so they're kind of implying that there's, sci-fi weird foul play involved by the fact that there was no awkward sound. He was very neat. He was very good at his job. He was very nice. He seemed very happy with his girlfriend, and yet he just killed himself like that. Well, guess what? Stuff like that does happen in real life, and it happens a lot. A lot of times, there are people who are suicidal, who don't show. They purposely hide all the internal pain so no one else sees it, They present as if they're perfectly happy, normal person, neat house, good at their job, happy with their girlfriend, and then out of nowhere it happens. It happens. And guess what? No fucking empathic echo is involved. It happens in real life. So it kind of irritated me that the episode was implying that only people who are like completely disheveled and their room's a mess and they're like depressed and crying all the time, only those are the type of people that commit suicide. Which just isn't true, unfortunately. Now, to get a little bit personal, I've experienced suicidal thoughts in my life, and there's two different situations. One was post-divorce, where I was just in so much pain, I just wanted the pain to end. In that case, it was very obvious to anyone who looked at me that I was in extreme pain, and I just was overwhelmed with pain. That's one example. Another example is clinical depression, where I just feel a giant emptiness inside. It's hard to describe it's just your life feels like it has absolutely no meaning, and there's no reason why you would feel like wanting to move on. And in that case, it doesn't show outwardly. Outwardly, I just seem like a normal, happy-go-lucky, happy guy, which is what I imagine you get in cases like comedians. A lot of times these comedians are seen, they're funny, they're happy, they present as if they're having laughs all the time, but there are cases where they've actually been really depressed inside. So yeah, there's different situations, and I've sort of experienced sort of both sides of it. And so this episode kind of felt like it really rang untrue to me. It just felt, because it seemed to be implying for most of it that the only people who commit suicides are the ones that are crying constantly and are a complete mess, and their whole life is a mess, and they suck at their job or whatever, which just is not true. You don't need fucking sci-fi empathic things for stuff like this to happen. But yeah, so that part of it on a personal level irritated me. So not that I'm, just to be clear, these feelings I've described long in the past. So you don't have to like, oh my God, is this guy confessing? No, I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me now. But my past experiences, it kind of touched a nerve watching this episode, I suppose. And I don't know. I wouldn't go. I know this is a sensitive topic for many people, but I wouldn't. It's not so for me. Like, I don't watch an episode like this and being like, oh, they're being insensitive pricks. Oh, this is totally insensitive. As more along the lines, it's not. It's obviously written by people who don't know what the fuck they're talking about. It's more along those lines. That it's just bad writing. It offends me not on a personal level, but on as a critic, amateur critic that I may be, but still, as someone who appreciates watching sci-fi, good storytelling, that level it offends me. But anyway. Alright, so I gotta talk about Lieutenant Pierce, who is played by Mark Rolston, who is an actor I've seen tons of times and tons of things. He actually is a good actor. He does a really good job in this role. He's particularly playing a creepy guy. He usually plays a villain or someone who is, creepy and untrustworthy. So that is the one sort of good part of this episode. I've seen him in tons of stuff. I think I recognize him from Ahsoka. He was in Ahsoka. He was in Babylon 5. He was in a couple episodes of Star Trek Enterprise. One of them I recognized him in. I'm trying to think what else he was in. What he's probably most known for is Shawshank Redemption. At least I've seen that movie dozens of times. He played the leader of the gang, the rapist. And again, he does a really bad a really good acting job of a bad person, a really evil person. Apparently he was in 24. I don't really remember that. I probably would, probably would recall if I watched it. But yeah, no, he was been in a lot of stuff, but all the stuff I've been naming was after this episode. Shawshank Redemption aired after this episode, but who knows which one was shot first, because they both came out in 94. This was mid-94, Shawshank was late 94, or this is early 94, and Shawshank was late 94. But, movies some shoot more in advance than shows, so maybe it's shot before this. I don't know, but the point is, all this stuff I was mentioning came out after this, but I knew of this actor before I saw this episode. So when I saw him, I recognized him. I was like, hey, it's that guy. So where did I know him from? Well, the movie Aliens. He played Drake, which you're like, who is that guy? But if you've seen the movie tons of time like I did, he's the dude. He's one of the Marines towards the start of the movie. But he dies halfway through when all the Marines go to that, place, and most of them die. But they make a big deal out of his death because Vasquez was really liked him. Like they were two good friends, and he died right at the end. She was freaking out and wanting to go save him. But what's his face had to pull her back and be like, no, he's gone. So it was that guy. So he was barely in the movie. So to be quite frank, that's not where I recognize him from exactly. Because what it was is he read the audiobooks by Orson Scott Card, the Ender books. And so when I read the Ender books, which were my favorite books in the early 90s, when I was a teenager, I didn't actually read the paper books. I listened to the audiobooks. Ender's Game, and then the spin-offs like Xenocide and Speaker of the Dead, and all the other ones that came after that. He read them, the audiobooks. And that's when because when I was looking, I was like, who is this guy reading the audiobooks? And his bio said he played Drake in Aliens. I'm like, who the fuck is Drake? So then when I watched Aliens again, I was like, oh, okay, that's him. And so I recognized him by face, made a point of it. So by the time I saw this episode, I was like, hey, it's the dude who read the Ender books, who's in Aliens. So I was kind of already familiar with him, and I was like, oh yeah, he's doing a good evil guy. And then when I saw him in Shawshank, I'm like, hey, it's the dude from Aliens and Zender, who was in that Star Trek episode. He's playing a rapist now, and it makes sense. He's always a bad dude. Although I think he definitely played a villain in Enterprise, but I think some of these things he might not have played the villain. I don't remember. I'm sure there's something he was in where he wasn't a villain. But anywho, yeah, I think he does a good job in this episode. That's pretty much all I gotta say about this piece of crap. So I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters very much for supporting me on Patreon. Very much appreciated. It does help me continue with the channel. Very much indebted to all those that support me. So I'd like to give a big special thanks to Antarius, Brandon Neal Howells, and Jordan Johnson. Thank you all so very, very much for your very strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Migalisio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we have a few Patreon comments on this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Eye of the Beholder, more like my whole dork. Or booty crap, I guess. I don't know. This was a hard one. I vaguely remember this one. I feel like it's a Troi episode, which means it's not good. Troi had like one good episode, and it was the finale of Enterprise, her best work. By the way, Mark, do they ever explain why Deanna Troi has a completely different accent than her mom? Shouldn't she kind of sound like her mother? I'm telling you, little one, it makes no sense. It's total booty crap. If I recall, I think that they do in fact explain why she has a different accent than her mother. It's a BS excuse, but I believe they're saying that the helper, the servant guy before Mr. Home, used to have that accent, and he kind of raised her a lot, and so he gained the accent from him. I don't know, that's what I recall. I don't know if I'm just making that up, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. And that's just as lame as in Star Trek Picard Season 3 when they tried to say that Jack Crusher has a British accent because he went to school in England, even though he's raised by Beverly Crusher, who's very much American. So, yeah, I don't fucking know. And maybe he inherited it from Jean-Luc. It was genetic. That's fucking Star Trek logic for you. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, Lieutenant Daniel Kwan commits suicide as he witnessed a murder by Lieutenant Walter Pierce in his telepathic mind. Instead of reporting this, he hunts down Pierce to confront him. So Pierce has the ability to access someone's mind like he is Charles Xavier. This is the hidden prologue of this episode, written by me. Worf failed again as security officer when they realized that Kwan's suicide may be a murder because Troi gets the prologue scene transferred into her mind. Lieutenant Walter Pierce was in the prologue, but Worf does nothing as usual. This is what dumbass Worf should have done. He should have gone to Picard and Riker. Picard, how is the investigation going regarding Lieutenant Kwan's suicide? Worf, we believe it may be murder, sir. Riker, how come? Worf, Counselor Deanna Troi has received images in her mind of a possible murder, and her suspicions were correct when Geordi found skeleton remains from 8 years ago. Picard, do you have any leads, Commander? Worf, Lieutenant Walter Pierce may have been involved, as Counselor Troi said he was in the flashback that she saw, and she also believed that he may also have telepathic powers. Picard, is there any evidence that he is involved? Worf, no sir, but we should confine him to quarters just in case he knows more than he's letting on. Picard to Lieutenant Pierce, please come to my ready room. This scene was deleted so the episode could happen. Renee Echevarria has so many bad episodes on TNG and was the weak link on Deep Space Nine. I'm talking about the main writers on Deep Space Nine. The episode falls apart after the scene in engineering, as they deleted the fictional scenes in the ready room and replaced it with whatever was the scene in Deanna's quarters. So my rating is 4. Are we really sure that the right Worf came back in the episode parallels? Maybe it was Worf who was murdered maybe it was the Worf who was married to Deanna Troi. Out of 10. I so disagree about Renee Echevarria. I think he's one of my favorite writers. I think he's one of the strongest writers. I think he has a really good job. This is not a good example, but I blame Brennan Braga for this. He's the one who mainly wrote this episode. Freaking Renee Echevarria did the teleplay. But anyway, not every writer is going to be amazing every single time. I think he's really good. He's one of my favorites. But that is just my humble opinion. Now, as for your deleted scene, I'm a bit confused by it, because are you changing the story so that Lieutenant Pierce was alive the whole time? because the stuff with Pierce and being a lieutenant on the Enterprise during the incident, he was dead. That was all in the fantasy. When we see Lieutenant Pierce on the Enterprise, that's a fantasy. In real life, he died 8 years before the Enterprise, before this time. Before the Enterprise was even launched at Utopia Planitia. And so are you rewriting it so he's actually still alive and he's the one putting his implants into Lieutenant Kwan or whatever? And the stuff about the skeleton remains, that was also during the fantasy. There actually weren't any skeleton remains. So, are you saying, is this rewriting the fantasy, or are you rewriting the whole episode so that these elements of the fantasy were actually real? I'm a little confused. But, I don't know. But that's just me. I think we're in agreement that this is a bad episode. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, this is a total bullshit of an episode. I hate this pairing between Troi and Worf. They have no chemistry, and it is very uncomfortable to watch these two together. The entire episode with this random Vulcan killing himself, and then Troi has to investigate. I just didn't care about this plot, and it's such a piss poor way to hook up Worf and Troi together. I also found the dream sequences very bad and boring, and also the final line of the episode where Troi tells Worf, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," was so cheesy as hell. So I hate this episode, so my rating is a 10 out of sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth, making you give this a 10, Ricky. No. So my rating is a 2 out of 10. Just a correction, it wasn't a Vulcan who killed himself, it was some random alien who's supposed to be empathic, some alien we never heard of before. But I agree 100% about the hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. That was so cheesy when she said it. It was so cheesy, and I totally agree with the overall sentiments of this episode. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, this episode starts a string of episodes that feel like the conclusion of the series to me. Guest characters reappear to more or less complete their character arcs. Wesley, Rolaren, Alexander, Barclay, or we revisit the beginning of the series. This episode, Bloodlines, all good things. In a certain way, Emergence concludes the storylines about AI, Data, Moriarty, exocomps. Of course, there are some missed opportunities, like a two-parter with the return of Riker's father, including endless arguments and fights between them. Or we could have revisited the totally not stereotypical characters from Up the Long Ladder. Just kidding, of course. To get to this episode, the teaser succeeds in building up tension. The way this part of the episode is constructed is another example of bad workplace security on board the Enterprise. Why is there a big opening to such a dangerous area? I thought we left the more extreme aspects of the Roddenberry box by now, but his girlfriend doesn't show any grief at all. I wonder if she is just a bad actor, or was she instructed to act this way? Although one could excuse it by saying that it was just a hallucination, but the Troi romance feels out of character and forced. All in all, the episode starts strong but gets weaker and weaker. The solution that it was all just an illusion and happened in a period of just some seconds was not satisfactory, and the whole concept of the psychic rescue is a little bit unbelievable. The lighthearted last scene didn't fit the gravity of the episode, but I think the episode was directed well, and the camera work and lighting was very good in some scenes, so I think the positive moments and the suspense of the first half of the episode outweigh the negative second half. Plus, no stupid anomaly or unnecessary B-plot, so I will give it 6 out of 10. Well, you're very generous to this episode, in my opinion. I do agree that the directing was good, and I agree that the first scene was really good. It just started getting weaker and weaker. Totally agree with that, and I agree that the directing, the lighting, and the shots and how it was shot was really good, but the writing sucked. The writing was terrible, and it led to bad acting from both, as you mentioned, Calloway. The answer is, was she told not to show remorse? I think the answer is no, because she is acting like she's sad, because she's saying, oh, I don't understand how you could have died. But she doesn't come across as sad because it's bad acting. So the answer to your question is yes, bad acting is the answer. Bad writing is the answer. Bad acting by Marina Sirtis in this episode. Bad acting by Michael Dorn is just poorly written. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, okay, so of the count them 3 episodes on Worf and Troi, this one is by far the worst. I guess it tries to attempt to show us in a convincing way that Troi has feelings for Worf and they pursue their Scooby-Doo investigation together, but instead it gave me bad Man of the People flashbacks instead of seeing Troi more in anguish than in anger, jealousy. As for the premise and the revelation, meh. Execution of some interesting ideas, but wasted in trying with the sake of the finale to get us to buy out of nowhere that Troi and Worf, when the only time it worked was in parallels where it could only work, not this universe. 4 out of 10. So the fact it was all a dream, that it was all inside her head, that's obviously an issue for me in this episode, but it's not always an issue, because I talked about recently when I did a live stream for one of my favorite episodes, the franchise Year of Hell, how people love to complain about the fact that nothing really happened and it's reset and everything's undone, but that doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't bother me that none of that really happened or none of the characters remember it, because we saw what the Cowley characters would really react in those situations. But this is different, because this is not time travel undoing something. This is all in her head, and it was just some empathic vision, so it's not really supposed to be how the characters would react, so it accounts to basically nothing. And it's different too than other episodes where it was all in their head, such as Frame of Mind, which I love. One of my favorite episodes. The majority of that episode didn't actually happen in real life. It was all inside Riker's head, some of it pulling from some of his memories, but it was mostly a battle between his subconscious and the drugs that the officers were giving him to try to get information from him, and how his subconscious was trying to warn him of the dangers around him. Also, phantasms go along with that theme, where it was his Data subconscious trying to warn him through his dreams. So that stuff's different than this. This is not as complex or thought-provoking or touches on reality and or someone's subconscious trying to warn him of something. This was simply Troi living out a predetermined fantasy that her own personal life was inputted, downloaded into it, but he's basically going through the paces. And yeah, I find that boring. And I find the fact that we wasted half the episode on this fantasy bullshit that Lieutenant Pierce isn't real. He died 8 years ago. So I feel what's the fucking point in even having him there? I feel I know he's supposed to be creepy the way he goes up to Troy. It's you know what you have to do. Yeah, it's supposed to be creepy. But it's not, because she's basically reliving a predetermined destination by this empathic echo, which I totally don't fucking buy, by the way. But even if I do, let's say we go with it. There's an empathic echo that causes people to kill themselves. The fact that we have to go through the paces of seeing her relive this fantasy that's leading her to suicide is really irrelevant. It really doesn't account to anything. It doesn't matter. It's not interesting. It's not thought-provoking that the way the dream sequences and frame of mind or phantasms are. It's just a waste of time. So anyway, thank you patrons so much for your comments. So my rating for Eye of the Beholder out of 10 is going to be a 3, very poor. I'll be nice and not give it a 1 or a 2 because I really like the opening scene. That was, as I said, very powerful, and some of the stuff with Kwan at the very beginning of the episode was interesting and creepy. But the more the episode went, the worse it got, especially once it got into the Troi romance where she started making out with Worf. It just became silly, pointless, complete waste of time, goofy, out of character, and dumb. And by the way it portrayed suicide, completely inauthentic and not appreciated. So, yeah, bad episode. Just overall, I mean, beyond the whole putting Worf and Troi together, which, as I said, that was an immediate turnoff. But it manages to be worse than even that. Like, this is just a really bad episode. And, a lot of people are like, oh, this is typical of Season 7. I don't think it is. I think Season 7 is usually way better than this crap. It's funny because most people, I was just watching a review that loved this episode but hated Masks and thought, oh, this is a nice sort of release after that terrible episode Masks. I think Masks is way better than this. I'd much rather watch Masks than this episode. Give me freaking Spiner hamming it up going, Masaka is waking, over like Troi bad acting, killing Worf, and then Worf acting completely out of character and finding out most of it's fucking fantasy and didn't even happen anywhere, so who gives a shit? Much rather watch Masks. But that is just me. That is just my humble opinion. So anyway, that is it for my review of Eye of the Beholder. So if you did enjoy this video and you want to support the channel, you can leave a like, comment, subscribe. All that stuff really helps me out in the algorithm. If you would really like to support the channel, you could consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. There's different tiers for different rewards or different budgets, and different rewards such as a Patreon only series I do where I revisit reviews that I've done in the past and pre-releases and stuff like that. So let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. Where are we? Thursday will be my review for Star Trek Lower Decks Season 5 as a whole. Saturday will be my top 10 favorite shows of 2024. Monday I'll be ranking the movies that I saw in 2024. And then Wednesday back to Star Trek with my review of the DS9 episode Playing God. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. Thanks a lot.